convulsed him, and with a loud cry came out of him. All were amazed and asked one another, "What is this? A new teaching with authority? He commands even the unclean spirits, and they obey him." His fame spread everywhere throughout the whole region of Galilee. The Gospel of the Lord.
Praise to you, Lord Jesus Christ.
My brothers and sisters in the Lord, questions. Our lives are filled with questions. Children ask all sorts of questions. I remember a few years ago, I was at City Park with one of my godsons and his family. And it was sort of a picnic. And he was about 5 years old at the time. And so he began to ask me, he calls me Papa. He said, "Papa, is God in the tree?" And I said, "Yes, God's everywhere. He's in the tree." And he thought about that for a minute, and he said, "Well, is God in those flowers?" I said, "Yeah, God's in the flowers. He's everywhere. He's in the flowers." And he waited a minute, and he said, "Well, is God in the sky?" I said, "Yes, God's in the sky. God's everywhere. He's even in us." And then a little while went along, and then while we were out there in City Park, all of a sudden, it started to rain. And he said, "Papa, why is God tinkling on us?" I wasn't sure how to answer that question. Questions. We have a very important question that is asked in the gospel today. The question, what do you have to do with us, Jesus of Nazareth? My brothers and sisters, that is a very compelling question. It is also a question that sounds very confrontational, and it is. It comes from a man who is there in the synagogue who is possessed by an unclean spirit. What I want to say to you today, my dear friends, is this. That question, what do you have to do with us, Jesus of Nazareth, is a question that all of us ask. What do you have to do with us, Jesus? What do you want of us, Jesus? What have you come for, Jesus? It is a question that is asked over and over again in different forms throughout our entire lives. We have to remember, my brothers and sisters, that this is taken from St. Mark's Gospel. St. Mark, scholars believe, is the first gospel to have been written at about 70 AD, which is about 40 years after the death and resurrection of the Lord Jesus. So imagine someone writing today about something that basically happened in, 1985. 40 years ago. Where were you 40 years ago? I know where I was. I was in kindergarten. And it was the year of the what? The World's Fair. 1985. So it was written 40 years after the death and resurrection of the Lord Jesus. And so there were still people who had very intimate knowledge and memories of Jesus. They saw Jesus. They heard Jesus. But there were also those individuals in which had never come to experience the Lord Jesus. And so they were coming to experience Jesus through the testimony of others. And we see that in the gospel today. To experience Jesus through the testimony of others. And so Mark is writing this gospel to those individuals who are asking that question. Who is Jesus? What does he have to do with my life? And for St. Mark, my brothers and sisters, we see two important answers to that question this morning. What have you come to do with us, Jesus of Nazareth? One thing that Jesus came to do, my dear friends, is that he came to teach. Because where do we find him in the gospel today? And we often find him in St. Mark's gospel. He's going into the synagogue in the city of Capernaum. And Jesus was very familiar with the synagogue. The synagogue was the place in which the Torah, what we would call the first 5 books of the Bible, where the word was proclaimed, where teaching was taking place. Jesus came to teach. And if the word became flesh and made its dwelling amongst us, Jesus He teaches by his very life. He teaches by his very example. He teaches by the words he speaks and the action that he does. My dear friends, Jesus has come to teach us, to form us. And that's a wonderful thing to remember as we celebrate this week, Catholic Schools Week. Because in a very rich way, my dear friends, one of the earliest ministries of the church is the ministry of teaching. One of the earliest ministries of the church is the ministry of formation and education. And so in a very special way this week, we celebrate a very long history, not only here at Mary Queen of Peace, but throughout the world, of the church being an example of Christ the teacher, of forming minds and forming hearts and forming the whole person in the image and likeness of God. And that's what we do each and every day. Whether or not, you see, my good friends, we are in that ministry of Catholic education, or whether or not we're here at Mass and hearing the word proclaimed, Jesus is teaching. And that is an important element of how we would answer that question. And it's a very important element when we talk about the mission of Catholic education, because the mission, my brothers and sisters, is to form hearts and minds according to the way of Christ. As one author wrote this, and it was in a sign that was posted in a Catholic school. It said something like this, and I'm sort of paraphrasing, but it said, "Be it known to all who enter here that Christ is the reason for the school. He is the unseen but ever-present teacher in the classroom. He is the strength of our parents, he is the model of our faculty, and he's the inspiration for our students." Christ is the teacher. And so, what do you have to do with this Jesus of Nazareth? Jesus came to teach. But St. Mark answers that question in a second way. Jesus also came to heal. Because the question is asked by a man who is possessed by an unclean spirit. And as we continue reading from St. Mark's Gospel for the next 2 Sundays, my brothers and sisters, we will see in various ways how Jesus heals. How Jesus heals Peter's mother-in-law, how Jesus heals a leper. And we'll see, my brothers and sisters, that that act of healing is so very important, of how he performs these miracles, because this is actually the first miracle performed in St. Mark's Gospel, of Jesus casting out an unclean spirit or a demon. And when Jesus does that, my brothers and sisters, what we are reminded of is that for St. Mark, about a third of his Gospel deals with Jesus' miracles and healings. And these very occurrences remind us that the Lord Jesus has come to heal us and to make us whole. And I think we all can agree, my brothers and sisters, that in the year 2024, we live in a very broken world. We live in a world that is possessed by many, many, many unclean spirits. And sometimes, my dear friends, and many times, we allow those unclean spirits to take possession of our own lives. The unclean spirit of greed, or materialism, or individualism. The unclean spirit of violence and racism and hatred. The unclean spirit, my brothers and sisters, of despair and loss of hope. I was certainly amazed, my friends. Just recently, I read a study that they did coming out of COVID. We have the highest teen suicide rate in the United States than we have ever had in history. And one of the reasons is because our young people do not realize that even in times of great trial, there is always hope. There is always healing, because Jesus is the healer. He casts out the unclean spirits. And he desires to do that in our own life. Do you feel, my brothers and sisters, you need to be healed? Do you feel like you're hanging on by a thread? It's like the story of a monastery that was way up in the hills in Europe. And the only way to get to the monastery was by a basket. A large basket with this large woven bucket. And the monks would put you in the basket, and they would tug on the rope, and they would put you all the way up the mountain. And so the way to get to the monastery. One of the visitors was visiting the monastery, and so the monk got him in the basket, the monk got in, the other monks began to pull him up. And he looked at the rope that was being used, and it was very, very frayed and very, very old. And so he asked the monk, he said, "How often do you all change this rope?" And the monk said, well, every time it breaks. My brothers and sisters, we feel like you're holding on to a frayed rope that's just about ready to break. If you do, Jesus is the healer. He is there to cast out the unclean spirits in our life so that we can experience the freedom of the children of God. That's what he wants to do. And he wants us to remember, my dear friends, that when we have those moments of hopelessness, when we have those moments of darkness, and those moments, my brothers and sisters, those moments can be a holy moment. And you may say, what in the world Mother Cooper's talking about? Somebody recently at one of the Lovatus meetings spoke about this. She said her boss came into the boardroom one day and said that, all those moments of crisis in your life, those moments are holy moments. Because in those moments, you realize that you can only depend ultimately on God. And then in depending upon God, you also need to depend upon the community that is around you, which hopefully is part of your church community, your church family. And so many times, our brothers and sisters, we are hopeless, or we lack hope, or many people lack hope because they do not know the Lord. And they are not part of a community of faith that helps build them up and care for them. You see, my dear friends, what Jesus is saying to us in the gospel today, when he's asked the question, what do you have to do with us, Jesus of Nazareth? The answer, my brothers and sisters, is this: Jesus has everything to do with us. He wants to be part of every single aspect and area of our life. He wants to teach us. He wants to heal us. He wants to make us whole. Whether you feel battered and beaten and worn and broken and torn down, or whatever it is in your life, my dear friends, that needs to be healed, Jesus has come to set us free and to heal those wounds. If we only give him our hand and walk with him each and every day. It's like the old song. Precious Lord, take my hand. Lead me on and let me stand. I am tired, I am weary, I am worn. Through the storm, through the night, lead me on to the light. Precious Lord, take my hand. Lead me home. My dear friends, Jesus asked all of us the question today. And in asking the question, we have to know what our response is. Jesus wants to be our everything, the essence of our life. What do you have to do with us,